So our first speaker then is Tamsin Cooper, and prior to taking up her current role, Tamsin has held a number of roles in DEFRA, including leading the EU exit oversight team and in the strategy unit. Before joining government in 2018, she had a career as a political strategist and policy advocate working on agriculture and climate issues. Tamsin was a member of a NERC advisory committee and currently is a board member of the Grantham Institute, whose mission is to contribute world-class research and innovation on climate. Over to you, Tamsin.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to the Royal Society for hosting this event this evening and for inviting me to take part in the panel. I should just clarify that the National Food Strategy team within DEFRA finished its role on Friday, so I have just moved into a new role at the Department for Health, so I'm just at the end of my time with the National Food Strategy. So in the next 10 minutes, I wanted to do a number of things. I wanted to say a bit about what the National Food Strategy is. I want to talk through what the case for change is, say a bit about what we set out to do and what recommendations we made, and then say a bit about what next. And then hopefully we will have lots of time for discussion, both through the chat and through the discussion at the end of this. So the National Food Strategy is an independent review. And what that means is that a team of civil servants go and work on a set of issues, sometimes cross-cutting across many different government departments. They look at the evidence, and we spent a long time going through evidence on all aspects of the food system. And then we publish a report and a set of recommendations, which are not government policy. You have the space and the freedom within an independent review to look at the issue afresh and make recommendations. So this review was commissioned by Michael Gove when he was at DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and he invited Henry Dimbleby to be the reviewer. What happens next is that a team within government takes up and looks at the evidence and the recommendations, and there is a white paper process, which means this is the process by which some of those recommendations are either adopted as formal government policy or not, as the case may be. And that white paper will be published in spring or in early 2022. And, as an independent review team, we have nothing to do with the white paper process because we've delivered our thinking on the set of issues. So I want to begin. Now, we spent a long time, 18 months, looking at the food system in its entirety. And before COVID struck, we went out and we did loads of visits on different types of farms, to abattoirs, to hospitals. We really wanted to understand the food system through the eyes and the lived experience of people working in it. We conducted a big public dialogue process, and Ruth sat on our advisory board as part of that. We convened many groups and academics, and I know some of the work that UKRI funded contributed to it. And so we've got this wealth of evidence, and I do encourage you to look at the website of the National Food Strategy, because as well as the report, we've got supporting documents and a slide deck with all sorts of content that is to be used and is readily accessible. I want to leave you with 3 stats this evening. So the first stat, and the first thing that makes the case for change, it is predicted that we will be spending, as on the NHS, we will be spending more on type 2 diabetes by 2035, more on this illness compared to the entire expenditure on cancer. And that's a phenomenal statistic. Type 2 diabetes is just to a large extent a preventable disease. It is diet related, and it's just swamping the number of cases, and the expenditure is swamping that in terms of everything we spend on cancer. And that, you know, that expenditure hides also, you know, the sort of impact that has on people's families and on people's friends and on people's employees. The second stat is that 85% of land under agricultural production is used for the production of livestock. That's both feed and land for grazing in and of itself. So we're in a situation where we need land for all sorts of different things, for food, for climate adaptation and mitigation, for nature, for recreation. We're using a very large proportion of our land for the production of livestock. And the third fact or stat that I want to leave you with is that the body mass of domesticated animals is 22 times that of the body mass of all wild animals on the planet. So it just shows the sort of proportion of body mass and calories that are being used in domesticated animals versus our wild fauna. So I could have chosen many more stats, and I'll leave you to fill in the gaps in terms of why that is a set of issues. But that is the argument that the case for change, that the food system, in spite of all the choice it gives to many consumers, in spite of the employment opportunities and everything else, all of the positives about the current configuration of the food system, there are these health and environmental impacts that we are experiencing. And when we think about a food system transition, we need to address these two things. So as the National Food Strategy, we set out to do two things: to make the case for change, to land some big ideas that might unlock change further down the line, to sort of reframe the debate around the food system, and to set out some immediate recommendations for government about change that could happen right now. And what we argued is that you know, this change process, it's going to take a number of years, a decade or so, to shift the system so that it is more sustainable. But it would not be right for us to prescribe all those changes as right now. As you know, the science will change, the system will react as different interventions come into play, social norms will change. There'll be a whole host of dynamic factors which suggest that we should only, it was our view that we should prescribe an immediate set of actions. So in terms of the framing and landing those big ideas, the first thing we wanted to argue or make the case for is that if you're concerned about nature and climate, we do need to think about the food system. Often when we think about climate, we think about coal, we think about forests, we think about transport. But the food system is an important part of that. And we really wanted to link the arguments around climate and nature with how we both use our land, but what we consume. That's an integral part of the debate. And we made the case for a 3-compartmental model in terms of how land is used. So we were basically made the argument that you needed to use land in a diversity of different ways. Technology has a role to play, as well as behaviour change. The second concept was that we made the case that we are collectively locked into a junk food cycle, which we described as a combination of the financial incentives in the system, as well as some of the characteristics of our appetite. We wanted to land that concept that there is a case for government intervention on health. And finally, we set out a series of targets to around dietary shift that we thought would make diets more sustainable. And then we came up with a number of objectives around breaking the junk food cycle, reducing diet-related inequalities, because the disparity between income groups around diet is significant, about making better use of our land, and finally about creating a long-term shift in our food culture. And there are a whole 14 recommendations that fall under those 4 objectives. So that, in a nutshell, is the sort of content of the strategy. There's lots to engage with and to look at. But as I said, the team has now finished, and there is a white paper process going on in government, but there are also groups from the research community through to civil society that are working on some of the recommendations. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much indeed, Tamsin. I actually, just reading through the report, you know, one of the things that occurred to me, and maybe I don't know whether you want to comment on this just now or not. I didn't realize that there was a disparity between I suppose the threshold for free school meals across the UK. I was astounded that it's, you know, twice in Northern Ireland what it, you know, it is elsewhere. Do you think, in that respect, do you think devolution has necessarily been a good thing in that respect?
Well, I think on many aspects of the sort of policies that we looked at, we had a devolved administrations group that worked very closely with us as part of this process, and we met with counterparts in all 4 nations. I mean, I think basically there are areas of collaboration and areas of joint learning, and there are clearly some areas where there are differences in policy across the different nations where different thresholds are set. And I mean, so I think there's lots to learn and lots to share.
Yeah, no, there certainly is. And just to be clear for the people that are on the call tonight, the main focus of the strategy, I think, from my reading, is England, but because of that devolved nature, there are lessons to be learnt in other other regions of the UK as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so it was commissioned as a strategy for England. Yeah. But obviously the food system, when you look at it, both in terms of its impact and production and consumption effects, you know, we brought trade into our considerations. And obviously, you know, it was a very live time when discussions about the Australian deal were taking place, and make a recommendation on trade as well. So hard to draw a sort of complete boundary around it, because we operate in a global food system, but specifically the recommendations focus on England, and that was our mandate.
Thanks very much, Tamsin. We'll come back to you no doubt during the Q&A at the end. Thank you.